All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Hey, thank you guys for actually showing up to the training auditorium. We are, for those of you that don't know me on Zoom, my name is Darren Lee. I'm assigned to the Burglary Auto Theft Detail as one of the sergeants. I'm also a coordinator with our peer support team. We have presentation number 2 of 2 in memory of or honoring the this week, which is Suicide Awareness Week. September is actually Suicide Awareness Month. So as a team, as a department, we put together a couple of events to bring awareness to this concept of suicide. Suicide has typically been a topic that is shunned and stigmatized. Hopefully, through the efforts of a variety of different mental health organizations, the Counseling Team International, and our peer support team at the Anaheim Police Department and the Anaheim Fire Department, we're hopefully going to address the stigma associated with suicide. I have to tell you, I got involved with our peer support team roughly 7 years ago, and I was kind of tired of seeing the same narrative of police suicides. Not only police suicides, but police officers that began engaging in self-destructive behaviors that led ultimately to the demise of their careers. Drug addiction, domestic violence, and suicide were just a few of the things that police officers that I knew were dealing with. Kind of tired of seeing the police suicide statistics, so I got involved with the peer support team. And as I did that, I always remember George Medina from the Alhambra Police Department who committed suicide. I remember Derek Trusk, Danny Mahalik, Kathy Johnson. Those colleagues of ours should be remembered for the great things that they did while they were here on earth with us, not how they passed away. So, so number 2 of 2 in terms of presentations, we have Carl Mascarelli, who is from the Counseling Team International. He's going to provide us with an overview or a bit of education in the area of police suicides. And then we'll open it up and spend about half an hour for questions. So as it always is the case with Zoom meetings, people don't ask questions. So I encourage you to come up with your questions, type them into the chat section, and either I or Shane will grab those questions and forward them to Carl. In case you all don't know, suicide turns out to be the leading cause of line of duty deaths for police officers. It occurs more frequently than cops getting shot by bad guys. It occurs more frequently than cops getting hit by cars in the line of duty. And so something needs to be done. And one of the things we do is we have a great contract with the Counseling Team International. They'll come out and they'll work with our peer support team and put together critical incident stress debriefings. They'll also meet one-on-one with each member of this police department. If you have any issues related to emotional and mental wellness that have to do with yourself, your significant other, your child, your mom, your dad, as long as they live in the house with you, we have a great contract with them, and I encourage you all to avail yourself to that. Services are confidential, and you will likely not pay anything out of pocket. I can't even remember anyone that's ever had to pay out of pocket for a session with the counseling team. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Carl from the counseling team, and I'll take a seat behind the camera there.
Okay. I wish I was able to move a little closer to you. I should have remembered that. Should have moved the Zoom thing 3 or 4 up. I don't like being this far away because I can't hear. And that was from growing up. I don't know. Some of you, we don't have really old people here like me in the room, but when I grew up, hearing protection while you were shooting was, we didn't do that. And so now I have sustained the right kind of hearing loss because I went to an audiologist, found out that the hearing loss I have because I wasn't wearing ear protection when shooting is actually the exact same range as the female voice. So you can imagine what happened in a marriage when I get talked to, and I'm sorry, what are you saying? You know, and of course, there's always the blame is selected attention, right? But I approve now, and I always carry it with me. So it's great to be here today. It's good to be back. I've been here a few times for critical incident debriefings, And I find that the peer supporters are phenomenal here as far as helping out. So it's great to be here. Today we're talking about suicide awareness and prevention. And so I'm going to be mostly talking about, okay, here's the problem, and here's how to identify it, and here's what to do if you're struggling with it, or if you see somebody, more than likely you see somebody that might be struggling with it. So that's what that's what the talk is going to be about today. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. It's not about dying, it's about stopping the pain. Almost everyone, to a person, when they're thinking about suicide, it's not about, I want to just die. It's, I want to stop whatever's going on in my life that's creating so much pain. So the first thing is, if you're trying to help somebody who is struggling with the idea of suicide, find out where their pain is coming from. And we'll go over that in just a minute about the different causes or things that initiate that the thinking about suicide. I want to start with a clip from this is
The
from
world's
CBS
largest organization for police says it's fighting a mental health crisis with an increasing number of suicides by officers. Nationwide, 188 have died by suicide so far this year. Now that is twice the number of officers who have died in the line of duty. Think about that for a second. Yesterday, police chiefs from all around the country gathered in Chicago to address the crisis in a special forum for the very first time. Jeff Pegues has covered law enforcement extensively and moderated the discussion. Jeff, what did we learn?
Well, good morning. Police commissioners from around the country say removing the stigma of seeking help is the first step in combating this epidemic. We met with those inside affected by suicide and those outside of the department on the front lines of this fight.
He was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, which he suffered with for 13 years.
At this year's International Association of Chiefs of Police Conference in Chicago, finding solutions for a disturbing trend in officer suicides was top of mind. Janice McCarthy understands the importance of speaking up. Her husband, Paul, a 21-year veteran of the Massachusetts State Police, took his own life in 2006. What needs to change?
The culture needs to change.
It's that culture, which she calls a fear by police officers against expressing their emotional and mental health, that may be contributing to the increased police suicide rate. She believes her husband's suicide was brought on by his mental and physical struggles after he was run over by a bus while on the job.
You'll be fine. Suck it up. It'll go away. It didn't go away. And the department didn't know what to do with that.
Earlier this year, President Trump authorized $7.5 million annually for the next 5 years for national police suicide prevention efforts, including mental health screening and more training.
Let's just all admit we're broken and join arms and let's talk about this stuff. Because we're not meant to do this by ourselves. We're not meant to suppress on this.
Detective Matt Thornton has been with the Zion Police Department in Illinois for 16 years.
It's very, very difficult.
Thornton admits to bottoming out from the demands of the job and planning to take his own life.
Crying and going over his plan. And I see a lady walking in the parking lot and she's coming straight to my squad car. She knocks on my window and she hands me this red cross. And she said, "You need this." And it was the most surreal moment in my life.
He says that moment changed his life and made him realize that he needed to reach out for help, something cops don't often do.
It needs to come to the forefront because I'm sick of it. I'm sick of crying because I can see the signs because I live them.
Thornton says that he has made it a point in his life to help fellow officers in need. Some departments do have trained mental health professionals on staff for support, but there doesn't appear to be a national standard for treatment or even a data to know what's really needed or available.
This is such a tough situation, it seems, because you expect police officers to be so strong and confident. And I've heard officers say, you go to seek help and then they're judged, and then sometimes they're ridiculed, which also makes it hard for them. I'm glad this is a conversation, Jeff.
Yeah, that is the stigma, right? You have this profession where you have to be macho and tough. And once you reveal this vulnerability, are you still gonna have a job? And I spent a lot of time talking about that yesterday.
But these guys see so much and experience so much out there in the field.
Well, how could that not affect you?
Yes.
Right, and that's what they were saying. If you're not human, well, yeah, of course, you're not gonna be affected.
Right.
But if you're human and you see the kinds of things that they see over and over and over again, it adds up.
Police officers always see people at the worst day and the worst time of their lives, and they are human. They are human. Thank you very much, Jeff. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is open 24 hours a day for anybody who needs help. That number is there on your screen, 1-800-273-8255.
Okay. So one of the things that was talked about was that the idea that cops don't get help, and typically we don't. I remember when I first became a police officer in 1984, the thought idea of going even to a counselor for anything would basically ruin your career at that moment. And if you were told to go by your department, then you go. But then if you went on your own or because of the problem that you were having, that's sort of a career ender back then. And it was sort of like they were referring to. It's like, what, if you get hurt mentally, you just rub dirt on it and take a laugh. That's about the idea that they had back then. So we've come a long way. And if you look at the statistics, the scope of the problem is phenomenal. More cops die each year from suicide than being shot. And that even holds true this year so far. Fear and stigma continue to perpetuate this silence. And if you just look at from 2016 to 2020, and this data is a few months old. So those numbers have gone up. We're just past the halfway point of this year. So cop suicides are on the way up. As a matter of fact, did anybody catch the news report about the Cleveland Police Department where they had an officer-involved shooting where an officer was killed? An officer was killed and an officer committed suicide in their department the same day. And you can imagine the trauma that hits and what goes through and the morale and everything that hits a department like that when you're hit twice as hard with something as devastating as that. Approximately 80% of suicides, and those who commit suicide have communicated their intent. And so we know that, statistically, we know that the person who committed suicide or suicided, when they suicided, they had already said something to somebody usually the week before, and sometimes the day before or the same day. That some red flags of people, this is important to be able to see who might be getting into trouble with it and start thinking about suicide. Changes in typical behavior, withdrawal, isolation. If you know somebody who is gregarious, they're happy, they're always talking during briefings, or they're always having people come over or going out and having a beer, that kind of thing, and all of a sudden they stop, and it goes on for more than a week or two, something's wrong. And as we'll see, there's different things that happen in their life. If they talk about it to you, that's what you need to pay attention to, and we'll go into that right now. Complaints of physical illness, 50% have visited their primary physician within 1 week of their suicide. High-risk factors, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and post-traumatic stress injury. There's two different things. One is a disorder and post-traumatic stress injury. And maybe this is an injury that happens out of a critical incident that hasn't risen to the point of the disorder yet, but it still impacts you. It's like getting a concussion. It hurts you, it hurts the brain. And critical incidents do that, and they build up. PTS it's not the person refusing to let go of the past, but the past refusing to let go of the person. I think that's really important. It's not that somebody who has PTSD just won't let go of it. It's that they can't. And that's something to really remember, that the person can't let go of it. That's what makes it the disorder, and that's why they need help. And if you think about it, remember the first thing I said was suicide is about ending the pain. And if you can imagine, if you had a critical incident you went on, and that's what you're thinking about, and all of a sudden you can't get it out of your mind, the idea of somebody pointing a gun at you and shooting at you. And that becomes so big that that's all you think about. You can imagine how that ruins your life, and that creates a pain in your life, because now your life is defined by that incident instead of all the other things you've done. And that's why PTSD and post-traumatic stress injury is so important to address, because it's presumptive now, and legislation has already gone through that if you're a police officer, the presumption is you have PTSD or PTSI, injury, at least an injury, because of the trauma that you've experienced and the critical incidents that you've come in contact with throughout your career. My experience personally has been, is if you've been a cop in a medium to large department, an active department, for more than about 5 years, you've already seen more critical incidents of trauma than most people will see in their entire lives. And that's just the first 5 years. Some of you, it could have been the first year or two that happens, where you collect it up. And so it's really important to look at and address the critical incidents that you come in contact with. The next is other high-risk factors: major losses, deaths, divorces, disability, injury, department investigations, secret behavior and shame. That refers to there are several who have been leading their cops who led a criminal life. Their habitual stealing. They're leading criminal life by, I don't know, there's some of the complaints about some of the departments who have a subculture of cops that go out and go get people and terrorize them and that sort of thing that, you know, that hits the news. But really it's about the personal kind of stuff where finding out that one of your own officers has been is a pedophile or has been exchanging child porn. That's definitely a career ender, and there's a lot of people, once that's found out, that they take their own life from it. That's what the secret behavior and shame is from. And this lastly, the recently separated is the highest risk. And we have found that when your relationship ends, especially if you're the dumpee, if you're the dumper, you can probably get by okay. But if you've been dumped, the highest 85% of those that get dumped who start thinking about suicide. And with that, it's you put on top of that, I think it's coming up right away, but it's you put on top of that is 80% or 85, 82% of people who are contemplating suicide and follow through have taken alcohol. And so alcohol is a huge indicator. Now you think about this. Person who's been drinking, maybe you know how it just it undoes their judgment. So that filter they had there where they wouldn't go to that place, all of a sudden they start drinking enough, now they go to that place. So if you have, let's say you're over at your buddy's house, he just broke up, so you're over there having a beer and he's polished off a case already, and you start hearing him talk about, you know, life isn't worth living anymore. I don't think I can go on without her, that sort of thing. This is a person who's right on the edge, right on the cusp of being a very high potential for suicide. And when we get into this in a minute, and I'll repeat this, and that is when you find somebody who is talking like this, you don't leave them. You have to wait until you get them to get help to them. They get away from the alcohol. And another important thing is, especially with cops, is you got to get them away from their weapons. Because most cops, guess how they commit suicide? They eat their gun. And that is permanent. And so that's why it's important. These two factors, they're going through a loss, like a divorce or separation, and they're drinking, that is a high indicator that suicide could be on the way. suicide prevention and intervention, ask the question, encourage help, offer resources. Ask the question. How you ask the question, now we're talking about if you see somebody, you suspect that they may be suicidal, and they're giving you some clues, you're worried about asking the question. And some of the myths are out there that if I ask, that'll put that notion into their head. Completely false. You cannot put a notion into somebody's head for them to commit suicide. It's already there if it's there. So don't worry about that. And what this slide is really saying is, it doesn't matter how you ask the question, it matters if you ask the question. And if you can't ask the question, you find somebody who can. And you could totally mess up how you ask, as long as you ask. And you know what? Be brutal. Ask, are you going to kill yourself? If you've been thinking about killing yourself, it's okay. So indirect or coded clues from that person. I'm so tired of life, I just can't go on. I'm over it, I'm through. My family would be better off without me. Who cares if I'm dead anyway? I just want out, I just want it to stop. I don't care if I wake up tomorrow. Those are all stuff that you might hear. Those are indicators this person is thinking about it. And so if you go, oh, they'll be okay, you just lie to yourself and you're not helping anybody. Ask the question. So different ways to ask. If in doubt, don't wait. Ask the question. If the person is reluctant, be persistent. Find a private setting for your talk. Allow the person to talk freely. Give plenty of time for to this person. Unbroken, direct, devoted time to them. And just listen, okay? The direct approach. You know, when people are as upset as you seem to be, they sometimes wish they were dead. I'm wondering if you feel that way too. That's okay. That's sort of a, that's a direct approach, but listen to this one. I'm concerned about you. You've looked depressed lately. Have you been thinking of killing yourself? Just come out and say it. Of all this, it's interesting. When you go on calls, this is a good thing to say too. When you go on a 5150 call, ask them, are you thinking about killing yourself? You're not going to put it in their head, and you're not going to be the cause of it. But you would do that. You could do that if you're on a 5150 call, but you won't do it for somebody who's your friend in the department. And so what we're saying is, if you really care about somebody, you're going to ask them and ask them directly. So that's okay to do it. Are you thinking about killing yourself? If you can't ask the question, find someone who can. And I think right there, it's just this is the commercial. This whole day is the commercial for your peer support. Peer supporters, your peer support program, those peer supporters have been trained in asking the question. They've gone through scenarios where they ask the question. They ask it in different ways. They know how to do that. Get your peer partners. Get on, if you don't have, hopefully all of you have in your phone numbers for your peer supporters. So get your peer supporters out there and make your peer supporters ask them the question. That's okay too. All right. Encourage them. Listen with your full attention. Avoid judgment. And remember, suicide is not the problem. It's their solution to stop the pain and offer hope in any form. So in this case, avoiding judgment, this is where you've really got to come in and be honest with yourself about how you feel about another officer taking their life. If you think it shows a lack of moral character, if you think it is weakness, if you think this person doesn't deserve to be a cop anymore because they're thinking that way, then you need to please call a peer supporter and get them to ask the question and be there and listen. However, if you really care about the person, then don't judge them. They're in probably one of the most difficult times of their life. And most people, if they're really honest, a flash of, maybe I wouldn't want to be around anymore when something bad happens, has gone through most people. And so not judging it, especially when it comes to what they do for a living. They're just in a really hard place at the time. Very important. Will you go with me to get some help? Will you let me get some help? Will you promise me you won't kill yourself until we found some help? Now, most important thing you can do if you find out your partner or somebody has been thinking about suicide is you don't leave them. And you don't do it by yourself. You don't leave them. So When you find that out and they say, yeah, I've been thinking about it, that's it. You're committed now. You need to stay with them. You do not leave their side until you can give a hot handoff to somebody who can help them. If that means you wait for a couple of peer supporters to come, it's very important that you get them help and you stay with them until they do. And that help could be you get them to a hospital, you get them to a doctor, you get them to the counseling team, or you get peer supporters in, chaplain in, you get whoever you need to get them in, you get them there, and you stay with them. See the theme here? Stay with them. Remove whether they're drunk or not. Make sure that they don't have access to weapons. You don't let them go into the back of their house. It'd be just like anybody. If you go to them and they're under this kind of duress and stress, you don't let them walk out of the room because you don't know what they're going to do, and you don't want them walking to the back of the house and putting a gun to their head and killing themselves when you are right there helping them. And so you don't leave them. You make sure that they're safe, and that's your responsibility at that point, because you're a human being, and two, you want to be there to help them through this. So you never leave them. That's the theme. Never leave them.
Carl, can I ask a follow-up
Absolutely.
question?
Go ahead.
Can you describe what it looks like for a cop who perhaps is needing help today? What does that look like? How does he ask for it? Who does he call? And then what does that process look like for him to receive the help that he needs that day?
Okay, that's a great question. And most of the time, if a cop is feeling that way and he knows he needs help, he's not going to ask for it. So if he does ask for it, that would be, or she, that would be rare. Or they've really come to the very end of their rope and they don't know how to do anything else. Okay. But most of the time, it's going to be with a friend or somebody that they trust. It's going to they could be calling the counseling team since they know about us now. But likely, it's going to be a friend or a partner, somebody that they trust. And it's important that whoever they go to listen. That's the biggest thing. Can I answer that question the way you
Well,
need?
but what I want to know is after that coworker or peer supporter says, hey, I'm going to be with you, what happens in terms of what facility does that person go to? Do we call insurance? Do we call the watch commander? Do we call an ambulance, a local police department where the incident is occurring? What does that look like?
Okay. Thank you. That moves me along a little bit. A lot of times you get somebody, especially who's drunk, you're with them, they're saying this stuff, and they don't want help. And you know now you can't leave them. So they're not going to get help. They don't want help. And they're calling you every name in the book because you're trying to keep them alive. So what would you do normally? And this is not a rhetorical question. I would like for somebody to just give your answer. What would you do if you were in the field and somebody said they were going to kill themselves?
Bob, what would you do?
Nope. Nobody's ever had that happen to them
You
before.
call her, they're going to the hospital,
That's right.
right?
You can do 5150s, can't you? And you can do a 5150 on a police officer. Now, that to me is a last resort. What I'd like to offer them is, look, you know you're going to end up at a hospital in front of a doctor, or you're going to get some help tonight. I'm not leaving it until you do. Your choice is whether you want me to 5150 you, or you want to walk in on your own. Right? I mean, that's your choice. Now, what most people are going to choose what?
Walking on their own.
Absolutely, because you get a 5150, that's going to start making your life complicated as far as continuing to be a police officer, improving your own, all that. If you walk in on your own and you get the help you need, all the better. So most people, even if they're that drunk, know that they don't want to be 5150, cuffed, put in the back of a car, driven over, to an ER and put in. They don't want that. So most of the time you get cooperation by going by the way I'm talking to you. A lot of times it's staying with the person, keep talking to them until they come down off of their drunk a little bit so they can start thinking again. But remember, as long as they're drunk, they're not feeling the pain as much. So you got to be careful about, I'll come back when you sober up. No, got to stay with them. Notice the theme, never leave their side. Make sure somebody with them all the time. And I wouldn't do it alone. Make sure you have somebody else, because people who are in that kind of place where they're wanting to kill themselves, when they get to that place, there are a lot of energy to try and talk them through this. So your willingness to listen and help can rekindle hope. Give resources. People with suicidal thoughts often feel helpless, hopeless, so you may have to do the heavy lifting for them in the beginning. They'll get help, they'll get a therapist, they'll go in. If they need medication, they'll get that. And that's no disgrace either. If they need it, they need it. You got most of the time, most people who are thinking about suicide and most people who have actually suicided are those who are depressed. And they're depressed for reasons. If you've been depressed or sad for long enough, your brain chemistry changes. Once that happens, this is no longer just sadness or a breakup. Once your brain chemistry changes, it's a change in brain chemistry. Once it changes, you can't will it back. You can't work out enough. And once it's gone, it's gone. It needs to be replaced with medication. And a lot of people fear medication because of all the horror stories, but get a good doctor, good medication, and a therapist, and you can get through that easily. And people actually have their lives changed by being back on the medication, so they can feel happy again. The reason why you feel happy is partly because of the circumstances you're in, but mostly because your brain releases the chemistry in your head, the chemicals in your head, in order for you to feel happy. Without that, I don't care if you're severely depressed, you just won the lottery, you're going to continue to be depressed. You're not going to feel happy. So the goal is keeping them safe and hook them up with hope. Resources, crisis, text line. Text any word to that number and you reach your crisis counselor. And there's these other resources. And if you're a peer supporter here, I would encourage you to get the app from the Counseling Team International. We have an app, I think it's $10. You pay for the app. It has resources on it. As a matter of fact, it's not a bad app for officers to keep too, because it has procedure about how to talk somebody down from suicide and different issues, but also resources for officers and staff who become suicidal. So there's some we're getting you here, and let's see, intervention and prevention techniques. Remain calm, rephrase thoughts, focus on central issues, stay close, emphasize temporary nature of the problem. All that goes into listen to what they have to say, offer them hope. We'll get through this together. We can get through this. The together part is a big deal. Most people who are thinking about suicide have disconnected themselves and isolated themselves from other relationships. To know somebody's going to go through it with them changes, it gives them hope. The other part of this is rephrasing thoughts, remain calm, focus on central issues, stay close. Biggest thing is don't leave them. Listen to all their BS they have to say, especially if they're drunk, and just keep saying, yeah, but we'll get through this. Yeah, but we'll get through this. Now, why don't we go to the ER? Why don't we go to the hospital? Why don't we go see a doctor? Let me call the peer supporters and get them over here. By the way, you don't need their permission. If they are really on that, if they've already decided they're going to commit suicide, you got to get them help. Just stay with them. So the biggest thing out there, stay close to them, and remind them, look, we'll get through this together. That's the biggest part. Do not overlook the signs. Do not sound shocked if they say it. Don't debate morality with them. Do not leave the person alone. Do not remain the only person helping. That's a big thing. Don't try and do this alone. Get somebody over to help. If you know this person has somebody close to them in the department, call them over. Call peer support. Get somebody to help you. Never do it alone, because there's going to be times when you need to make a phone call and somebody else needs to talk to them and be with them. So And like I said before, there are a lot of energy to take care of.
Carl, can I ask a
Yeah.
follow-up question?
Sure.
With regard to active listening.
Yep.
And we've got, let's say, our partner in the police car on a daily basis, and our partner may not be suicidal, but maybe expressing some dissatisfaction with marriage, life, work. How do you remain neutral and non-judgmental, but at the same time be there to listen to your partner? What are some techniques that you have to maintain? You want to encourage them to talk, but how do you do that without trying to suggest and fix things?
Well, if it's just the person in your car, they're just bitching and groaning. I don't know. You'll get it's almost impossible. You'll give them advice. You'll tell them what to do. Okay. If it rises to the level of I'm thinking about a divorce, I'm thinking about this, I would listen to them and then say, hey man, it sounds like you really need to maybe you need to talk to somebody. Why don't you get the counseling team a call? I mean, that would be as easy as that. It's difficult not to be judgmental when you think you're just chatting about something. But you'll know if it gets serious. If it gets serious, that's the time when you need to listen in a non-judgmental way and then get them help. Well, the whole thing is you don't have to fix it for them. You just need to get them to the next step, which is get them in front of help. Any way you can do that. You don't fix it, you just get them in front of help. Because you know what? A lot of times one cop doesn't want to fix another cop because cops don't want to be fixed. And so you move yourself out of that role of fixing them up. Now, again, if you're just chatting, you can have all the judgment you want. You can tell them whatever you want. It doesn't matter because we all do that. But when it comes serious, that's when I would listen and then refer. Listen and get them help and move them towards help. Did that answer your question there?
Yeah.
All right. You plant the seeds of hope. Hope prevents suicide. The whole idea is to remember suicide is a temporary solution, a permanent solution to a temporary problem or pain. And so what you want to do is move them past the temporary to the future, get them thinking about the future and what they want. I threw this in here today because I saw this on the news, and this is something that the Boston Police Department is doing. Remembrance of the Boston police officers who have died by suicide. Your life matters. Help is available. And on this, the very last, the last one there says, "May there never be another." And I think this is a bold step for a police department to do. It's one, admitting that we have people that commit suicide. It's another. It's not, and a lot of people would say, "Well, wait a minute, aren't you glorifying suicide by now putting them up there on a board, right?" And I love what you said, Sergeant Lee, about, you know what, it's not about glorifying the suicide. It's about glorifying their life and what they did and the fact that they were a brother or sister in law enforcement. And so they're up on the board because their life mattered. They're not up on the board because their death mattered. And I think that's really important, something to think about. And so that's a bold step to make for a police department. And that's what undercuts the stigma of not only suicide, but also mental health issues in general. And it's a very progressive thing to do. And you may have both positive and negative feelings about that, but it's a move in the right direction, I think. It all depends on the culture of the department. Okay. All right. Deanna, I'm not Deanna, but we're done. Okay, we're done with that now. I have left plenty of room for a plethora of questions, so here I go. Okay, anyone else? Can we just line up here, please, on the microphone?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So nowadays, law enforcement is tougher. Politically, it's tougher. Legally, it's tougher to do our jobs. And I hear in the hallways, cops really down on the profession. Some of them want to leave the profession. They're just tired of it. And I would imagine, in addition to the cumulative stress that we've accumulated over our careers, this is just an added factor on top of that stress. And we lose our sense of purpose. We lose our sense of motivation for coming to work. Can you talk about some of the sense of purpose that we had when we started our careers and what happened to it? Where'd it go?
Well, a lot of times it gets beat out of you. And that can happen in different ways. It could be from social media, from what's going on in society, from the riots, from the pandemic, the change in use of force laws, and just the climate that we're in. And that it can get beat out of you. And you can tell someone who is dealing with a lot more stress than they can handle, because what an officer will do is, they'll come in, they're very positive about the department, they appreciate what's going on, they love being a cop, but then you start seeing them being irritable, they start putting the department down, they hate this person and that person in the department, all of a sudden they become really negative. That's an indicator that they are taking on, that they're like their stress bucket's full. And what they're now doing is they're blaming things around them instead of taking ownership and responsibility. And I think it's you have to go back to your first love. It's like, why did you get into this in the first place? And a lot of times for people who've been in past 5 to 7 years, is that sweet spot tends to go away because of the trauma I was talking about, the accumulated critical incidents that you come in contact with. But now it's supercharged, because now we have a culture that says defund the cops and let's have no cops at all. And it's like, okay. And with that, how do you get resilience back? How do you get your first love back? And you have to remember why you're in it in the first place. And for some people, after that amount of time, that there's some people that got into this profession for the wrong reasons and they're not getting what they want out of it, and so they get bitter. And it's time for them to leave, quite frankly, because they're not getting what they thought they were going to get, and that they need to leave, because what they wanted wasn't altruistic, it was selfish. And like, I want power, I want to control people, I just want to carry a gun, that sort of thing. But people who get into this to serve others, to help people out, you can still do that. And that's why you got to go back to your first love. Why are you doing this in the first place? And when you can do that, for the camaraderie, for the service, and to be able to serve society and serve others, and to help and to rescue, those are valid reasons to stay in this. It's going to be more difficult, but if you go back to your first love and the reason why you started in the first place, that will help. Especially with resiliency.
Another question for you,
Yeah, absolutely.
because these guys, I know you guys are jumping
Well,
ahead.
they
You have a
don't want
lot,
to
I
be
know.
rude. They don't want to jump in.
So there's a
lot to absorb.
Thanks for not jumping in. I just have all these questions in my head. So you have an officer that is involved in an OIS or goes to multiple dead baby calls and asks for help because of the incident. It's really bothering him. Is it a work-related injury? Is it treated the same as workers' comp? And how does that whole thing evolve?
I don't know. I can't speak to the legal aspect of it or the HR kind of aspect of it. What I will say is that, like, it's presumptive that if you're a police officer and your performance is degenerating because of the things you've been exposed to, you can connect that to the job, and that sounds like a workman's comp issue for me. Now, is it always a workman's comp issue? You could probably say yes, but you can mitigate it and stop it before it becomes debilitating where you can't do your job anymore. And that's by getting help early and recognizing the signs and symptoms of that, which are some of the things that we've talked about today. The signs and symptoms: becoming irritable, change in personality, beginning to hate the job, that sort of thing.
And those things have been written into statute, into law, as a result of maybe last year.
Yep, it was last year when it became codified that that it's presumptive that if you're a police officer, then you're going to have PTSD. So now you can do what you need to do to get help. The whole idea was to try and legislate legislate opening up and removing the stigma to get help. That was the whole idea of it. Now, whether you go get help or not, it's still up to you. And the sooner you do, the better. There's some, I was talking to some therapists who were talking about before some people retire, they come in to get all that crap cleaned out, which is a great idea. But why wait until you retire? Why carry it all the time? And you can come in and like Sergeant Lee was saying, that all of you have the Anaheim Police Department has a contract with the counseling team. You get 10 free sessions a year, no money out of pocket. And if you call us, the department never knows who you are or why you came in. It's totally confidential. And you can either talk about work-related stuff or personal stuff. It doesn't matter, anything, because your department realizes your personal life affects your job and your job affects your personal life. And if you're happy in both, you're going to be better. Your performance at work will go way up, and it does. And it's also good for anybody in your household, you know, your wife, kids, husband, significant other. And that, for any reason, we've had some police officers bring in their autistic kid because they had autism and they just didn't know how to deal with an autistic kid. It has nothing to do with their job, but it does help, you know, it helps relieve some of the stress on them so that they can connect back with work better. So, thank you.
I think I ran out of questions.
You did?
Yeah.
You did good.
Yeah, but Michelle has a question.
Nice try.
And then Frank had one also. He's going to save it for later.
Same question that you asked him.
Yeah,
There you go.
you ditto. All right.
All right. Thanks, Carl.
Absolutely.
Hey, so before we close, I just want to give a couple of plugs. My Well app, in case you don't know, Marcy put together a really great smartphone app, My Well app, that contains a lot of stuff related to the WIN program. There's also a tab for peer support and a roster for our team and contact information. Also little bios on our team members. If you find that you have an issue either at home or at work, or maybe through prior military service, you're dealing with some PTSI or PTSD issues, we have a variety of different peer support members that have different expertises and backgrounds. So you can look at their bio and you go, you know what, this, Officer Damas, he comes from the same place I do. I think I'm going to reach out and give him a call because maybe we relate a little bit better. So avail yourself to that. It doesn't cost $10.99 like the app that Carl talked about. It's actually free. It's part of the WIN program contract. But still, that's the TCTI one, still a quality app as well. Secondly, we have openings for our peer support team. We would love to build our peer support team larger than it is right now. Over time, we've lost some members. And surprisingly, you don't think that there's a thing called compassion fatigue. And over time, if you're listening to trauma and you're listening and counseling other coworkers, sometimes it can take a toll on you. So there's a little bit of burnout. We would love for you to consider, or a coworker, to consider joining our team. If you think you have it within you and you have a purpose that's driven by helping your fellow coworkers, please hit up any member of the peer support team. Willie, Kelly, or I can kind of steer you in the right direction, but we need more peer support members. We can't do this alone. So I would say that everybody in this police department, even on Zoom, has kind of a responsibility to one another. We talk about family a lot, and that Anaheim Police Department is a family. But if you found that a coworker or your son or your daughter was having difficulty when he came home from school, and you walked in the door from work, and he was in his room sulking or crying, you wouldn't ignore that. You do something about it because you love your son, you love your daughter. And so what I'm saying is, if we're going to treat Anaheim PD like a family, let's take it another step further and realize our sense of purpose of why we come to work and why we help one another, and be a part of the team. So I encourage you to do that. If there's nothing else, do you have any other questions or comments? Comments are good. Nothing from the Zoom audience? Okay, great. Thank you for showing up. Thank you guys for showing up at the training auditorium. Doors always open to for any of us peer support members and the Counseling International. I also want to thank Carl for taking the time out of his day for coming. And with that, we'll go ahead and close it and take a snack when you walk out. And don't forget to sign in if you want winning credit. Thanks.